The morning started like any other Tuesday in the small fishing village of Marisol. The sun was just coming up over the water, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Anna stood on the old wooden dock, her notebook in one hand and a cup of coffee in the other. She was looking at the coral samples she'd collected the day before, making notes about their condition. Anna was 32 years old and had spent most of her adult life studying the ocean. She loved her work as a marine biologist even though it didn't pay much. The coral reefs near Marisol were dying, and she was determined to figure out how to save them. Every morning she came down to this same dock, checked her equipment and headed out in her small research boat. Her husband David was somewhere over the Atlantic Ocean right now. He was a pilot for a commercial airline, and he'd left 3 days ago for what was supposed to be a regular flight route. Before he left, they'd had breakfast together and talked about maybe taking a vacation when he got back. Their daughter, 7-year-old Isabella, had hugged him tight and made him promise to bring back one of those tiny bottles of airplane juice she loved so much. Isabella wasn't home right now either. She was staying with Anna's mother in San Rafael, a town about 60 miles inland. School was starting soon, and Anna's mother had wanted to take her shopping for new clothes. Anna had been happy to let her go. The weather reports had mentioned something about a tropical storm forming way out in the ocean, but that happened every year. Nothing to worry about. Around the dock, the village was starting to wake up. Old Mr. Chen was opening his bait shop. The Martinez family was loading their fishing nets onto their boat. Everything felt normal. Everything felt safe. But by 10 o'clock, things started to change. Anna was in her small office near the harbor, organizing her research papers when her phone buzzed. It was a text from her neighbor, Rosa. "Have you seen the weather update? They're saying we should evacuate." Anna pulled up the weather channel on her laptop. What she saw made her stomach drop. That tropical storm from this morning had turned into something much worse. It was now a major hurricane and it was moving fast, straight toward them. She quickly called her mother. "Is Isabella okay?" "She's fine, honey. We're far from the coast. But what about you? They're saying it's going to be bad." Anna looked out her window at the peaceful harbor. It was hard to believe a monster storm was heading their way. "I'll leave soon. I just need to secure my equipment first. All my research is here." That was her first mistake. By noon, the wind had picked up. The sky, which had been clear and blue just hours ago, was now gray and angry looking. Anna worked as fast as she could, moving her expensive research equipment inside, tying down her boat, boarding up the windows of her office. Other people in the village were already leaving. She could see trucks and cars loaded with suitcases, furniture, and scared-looking children. Mrs. Peterson from the post office waved at her as she drove past. "Anna, you need to go. This one's going to be really bad." "I'm going soon," Anna shouted back. "Just finishing up." But she wasn't fast enough. By 1 o'clock, the main road out of Marisol was completely flooded. The storm surge had come in earlier than anyone expected. Anna stood at the edge of the water watching the road disappear under churning brown waves. Her car was useless now. She was trapped. Her phone rang. It was David calling from a layover. "Anna, please tell me you're not still in Marisol." She didn't want to worry him, but she'd never been good at lying. "The road flooded before I could leave. But I'll be okay. I'm going to the lighthouse." "The lighthouse?" "Anna, that building is 100 years old. It's also the highest point around and the strongest structure in the village. I'll be safer there than anywhere else." There was a long pause. She could hear the airport announcements in the background. "I love you," David finally said. "Please be careful. I'll try to get home as soon as I can. I love you too. Kiss Isabella for me when you call her." After they hung up, Anna gathered everything she could carry: water bottles, canned food, flashlights, batteries, her phone charger, and a thick blanket. She put it all in a backpack and started walking toward the old lighthouse at the edge of the village. The wind was getting stronger now, pushing against her with every step. Loose pieces of metal roofed banged and clattered down the empty streets. A trash can rolled past her like a tumbleweed. The palm trees were bending almost sideways. The lighthouse was about half a mile from her office. It felt like the longest walk of her life. By the time she reached it, her clothes were soaked through with rain, and she could barely hear anything over the howling wind. The old door was heavy, but she managed to push it open. Inside, it smelled like salt and rust. The spiral staircase stretched up into darkness. Anna locked the door behind her and started climbing. The lighthouse keeper's quarters were at the top, just below the actual light. It was a small round room with thick stone walls and narrow windows. Someone had left an old cot and a wooden chair there years ago. Anna dropped her backpack and tried to catch her breath. Outside, the wind was screaming now. She'd been through storms before, but nothing like this. Through the window, she could see the ocean rising, the waves getting bigger and bigger, reaching toward the village like grasping fingers. She tried calling David again, but the call wouldn't go through. She tried her mother. Same thing. The cell towers must have been down already. Anna sat on the old cot and wrapped herself in the blanket. It was only 3 in the afternoon, but the sky was so dark it looked like night. The lighthouse was starting to shake. She could feel it in her bones, a deep rumbling that made her teeth chatter. She thought about Isabella, safe inland with her grandmother. She thought about David, somewhere in the sky. She hoped he was far from this storm. She hoped he was safe. And then the real hurricane hit, and the whole world turned into violence and noise. And all Anna could do was hold on and pray that the old lighthouse would stand. The hurricane hit Marisol like a freight train. Anna had never heard anything so loud in her entire life. The wind wasn't just blowing anymore. It was roaring, screaming, like a living thing trying to tear the world apart. The lighthouse swayed. Actually swayed. Anna could feel the whole building moving beneath her, rocking back and forth like a tree in the wind. She pressed herself against the stone wall as far from the windows as she could get, and tried not to think about how old this structure was. Then one of the windows exploded. Glass flew across the room and rain came pouring in like someone had turned on a fire hose. Anna covered her head with her arms and squeezed her eyes shut. The wind was so powerful it felt like it was trying to pull her toward the broken window. She crawled across the floor, staying low, and grabbed her backpack. She needed to get to a safer spot. There was a small storage closet in the corner of the room, barely big enough for one person. Anna squeezed herself inside and pulled the door shut. In the darkness of that tiny closet, she could still hear everything. The wind, the rain hammering against stone, and then, worst of all, the sounds of the village being destroyed, crashing, splintering, the groan of buildings being ripped apart. She thought about her little office by the harbor, full of years of research. She thought about the Martinez family's fishing boat. She thought about Mrs. Peterson's post office. All of it was probably gone now. Anna pulled out her phone. The battery was at 15%. No signal, of course, but she opened her voice memos app and started recording a message for Isabella. Hey, sweet girl, it's Mama. I'm in a big storm right now and I don't know what's going to happen, but I need you to know that I love you so much. You are the best thing that ever happened to me and your dad. Be good for Grandma, okay? And remember what I always tell you. Be brave, be kind, and never give up. Her voice cracked on those last words. She stopped recording and saved the file. Then she turned off her phone to save the battery. The hours crawled by. Anna couldn't tell if it was day or night anymore. The darkness was complete. She sipped water from one of her bottles and tried to stay calm. She thought about David, wondering where he was, hoping his plane had landed safely somewhere far from this nightmare. What Anna didn't know was that David wasn't safe at all, 30,000 feet above the Caribbean Sea. David's plane was in serious trouble. They'd taken off from Miami that morning, heading south for what should have been a routine flight. But the hurricane had changed course faster than anyone predicted, and now they were flying right into its outer edges. The turbulence started gradually. Just a few bumps, nothing unusual. David had been a pilot for 12 years. He'd flown through rough weather hundreds of times. But this was different. The plane dropped suddenly, falling through the air like a stone. Passengers screamed. Bags fell from overhead compartments. The oxygen masks dropped down, swinging wildly. David's co-pilot, a younger guy named Tom, was gripping the controls so hard his knuckles were white. "We need to turn around," he said. "I know," David replied, his voice steady even though his heart was racing. "I'm trying." But the wind had other ideas. It grabbed the plane and shook it like a toy. The instruments on the control panel were going crazy. Warning lights were flashing. The radio was filled with static. David thought about Anna. He thought about Isabella. He thought about that breakfast 3 days ago, when everything had been normal and safe. He wished he'd hugged them both a little longer. The plane dropped again, and this time it kept dropping. They were losing altitude fast. David pulled back on the controls, fighting against the wind, against gravity, against everything. Through the cockpit window, he could see something below. An island, small, covered in jungle, but it was land. There, he shouted to Tom. We're going for that island. That's not a runway. It's better than the ocean. David had never attempted anything like this before. No training could prepare you for crash landing a commercial airliner on an unknown island in the middle of a hurricane, but he didn't have a choice. He aimed for a stretch of beach, praying it was long enough, praying the sand was firm enough, praying for a miracle. The plane hit the water first, just offshore. The impact was violent. David's head slammed forward, then back. Everything was noise and chaos. The plane skidded through the shallow water and onto the beach, tearing apart as it went. Then everything went black. When David woke up, he was lying in sand. His head was pounding. His arm felt wrong, probably broken. He could taste blood in his mouth, but he was alive. Slowly, painfully, he sat up and looked around. The plane had broken into pieces. The tail section was in the water. The middle section was half buried in sand. The front section, where David had been, was further up the beach. People were moving around, crawling out of the wreckage. Some were helping others. Some were just sitting in the sand, staring at nothing. David counted quickly. Too many people were still. Too many weren't moving at all. He forced himself to stand. His pilot training kicked in. In an emergency, someone had to take charge. Someone had to help people survive. Is anyone hurt? He called out. Stupid question. Everyone was hurt. I mean, is anyone hurt badly? A woman with blood running down her face raised her hand. An older man was lying on his side, groaning. A teenage boy was crying, calling for his mother. David stumbled toward them, trying to help, trying to think. They needed to find shelter. They needed to find water. They needed to figure out where they were. Around them, the storm was still raging. The hurricane hadn't passed yet. They'd landed right in the middle of it. A flight attendant named Patricia appeared at David's side. She had a cut above her eye, but she was walking. How many made it? She asked. David looked around at the survivors gathering on the beach. He counted again, more carefully this time. Maybe 60. Maybe 70. I don't know. The emergency beacon? I'll check. David made his way back to the cockpit. It was crushed, barely recognizable. He searched through the wreckage until he found the emergency locator beacon. He pressed the activation button. Nothing happened. He tried again. Still nothing. The device had been damaged in the crash. No one knew where they were. No one was coming to help them. David looked up at the dark sky, rain pouring down on his face. He thought about Anna, alone in Marisol. He thought about Isabella, waiting for her parents to come home. He thought about the promise he'd made to bring back that little bottle of juice. He'd survive this. Somehow he'd survive this and get back to them. He had to. Back in Marisol, locked in her closet in the lighthouse, Anna had no idea that the man she loved was fighting for his life on a tiny island hundreds of miles away. She had no idea that the next time she saw her husband would be after 6 weeks of impossible searching, of refusing to give up, of betting everything on hope. All she knew was that the storm was still raging, and she was still alive, and that had to be enough for now. Anna spent 3 days trapped in that lighthouse. 3 days of darkness, wind, and fear. She rationed her water carefully, taking only small sips when her throat felt like sandpaper. The food she'd brought lasted a bit longer, but by the 3rd day she was down to 1 granola bar and half a bottle of water. The storm finally passed on the 4th morning. Anna knew because suddenly she could hear silence. Real silence. No wind, no rain, just the sound of water dripping somewhere and seagulls crying outside. She pushed open the closet door and stepped out into the lighthouse room. The sight nearly broke her. Everything was destroyed. The other windows had blown out during the night. Water covered the floor. Her backpack was soaked, but she was alive. Anna walked to one of the broken windows and looked out at what used to be her village. Marisol was gone. Completely gone. Where houses had stood, there was nothing but piles of wood and twisted metal. The harbor was filled with debris. Boats were scattered across the beach like toys dropped by a giant child. The Martinez family's fishing boat was upside down on top of what used to be the post office. Anna sank to her knees and cried. She cried for her village, for her research, for everything that had been lost. She cried until she had no tears left. Then she heard it. The distant sound of helicopter blades. She ran to the window and started waving her arms, screaming even though they couldn't possibly hear her. The helicopter came closer, circling the destroyed village. Someone inside must have spotted the lighthouse because it changed direction and headed straight for her. 20 minutes later, Anna was being lifted up in a rescue harness. As she rose into the sky, she got one last look at Marisol. From up here, it looked even worse. The village had been completely wiped off the map. The Coast Guard paramedic wrapped a blanket around her shoulders. "You're lucky to be alive, ma'am. We didn't expect to find anyone here." "My husband," Anna said, her voice hoarse. "David Reyes, he's a pilot. I need to call him." The paramedic's face changed. Something in his expression made Anna's blood run cold. "What?" she demanded. "What is it?" "Ma'am, we need to get you to the hospital first. You're dehydrated and—" "Tell me right now." The paramedic looked at his partner, then back at Anna. "There was a plane that went missing during the storm. A commercial flight from Miami. It disappeared over the Caribbean. They're still searching, but—" Anna couldn't breathe. The helicopter suddenly felt too small, the air too thin. "What was the flight number?" He told her. It was David's route. It was David's plane. The next few hours were a blur. The hospital. Doctors checking her vitals. Her mother arriving with Isabella. Her daughter's small arms wrapped tight around her neck. Anna held her little girl and tried to be strong, but inside she was falling apart. "Daddy's coming home soon, right?" Isabella whispered. Anna couldn't answer. She just held her tighter. The officials came later that evening. A man and a woman in crisp uniforms with sad, professional faces. They told her that David's plane had been missing for 4 days. They'd searched the last known position. They'd found nothing. No debris, no signal, no sign of survivors. "We're very sorry, Mrs. Reyes. At this point, we have to assume—" "Don't," Anna said sharply. "Don't say it. Ma'am, I understand this is difficult, but you don't understand anything." Anna stood up even though her legs felt weak. "My husband is alive." "I know he is," the woman spoke gently. "Mrs. Reyes, it's been 4 days. In these situations, the chances of survival are—" "I survived 4 days," Anna interrupted. "I survived in a lighthouse in the middle of a Category 4 hurricane. So don't tell me about chances." After they left, Anna's mother tried to comfort her. "Honey, maybe you should prepare yourself." For Isabella's sake, but Anna wasn't listening. She was thinking. She was a scientist. She solved problems. She found answers. And she was going to find David. That night, after everyone had fallen asleep, Anna opened her laptop. Her hands were shaking, but her mind was clear. She started researching everything she could about the missing flight. She read weather reports, ocean current data, wind patterns from the day of the storm. She made notes. She drew diagrams. She calculated trajectories and drift patterns. If the plane had gone down in the Caribbean, the hurricane winds would have pushed it off course. Way off course. The search teams were looking in the wrong place. They were searching where the plane's last signal had been, but that didn't account for the storm's impact. Anna pulled up satellite images of the Caribbean. There were hundreds of small islands in that region. Most of them were uninhabited. If David's plane had been caught in the hurricane, if the pilots had tried to make an emergency landing, they would have looked for land. She started marking islands on a map, eliminating the ones that were too far away or too small, focusing on the ones in the path of the storm, the ones with beaches long enough for a plane to potentially land on. Over the next few weeks, Anna barely slept. She left the hospital against doctor's orders and rented a small apartment near the coast. Isabella stayed with her grandmother. Anna knew her daughter needed her, but she also knew that finding David was the only way to make their family whole again. Everyone thought she was in denial. Her mother, her friends, even the therapist the hospital had recommended. They all said the same thing. She needed to accept reality. She needed to grieve. She needed to move on, but Anna refused. She kept researching, kept calculating, kept hoping. She reached out to every pilot she knew, asking if they'd be willing to search the islands she'd identified. Most of them said no. It was too dangerous, too expensive, too unlikely to find anything. Then she found Captain Rodriguez. He was a retired Air Force search and rescue specialist who now flew private charters. Anna called him on a Tuesday afternoon and explained everything. The storm, the missing plane, her calculations. "Mrs. Reyes," he said carefully, "I admire your determination, But the official search teams have equipment and resources that the official search teams gave up 2 weeks ago, Anna interrupted. They've declared everyone on that flight dead. But I'm not giving up. I have money. Not much, but everything my husband and I saved. I'll pay you whatever you need. There was a long pause. How much money are we talking about? $12,000. It's everything we have. Another pause. That's not enough for what you're asking. Anna's heart sank. Please, he's my husband. He's my daughter's father. I know he's alive. I feel it. Captain Rodriguez sighed. Where did you say these islands were? Anna pulled up her map. There are 3 main candidates. Based on the storm trajectory and the plane's last known position, these are the most likely locations if they tried to land. Send me the coordinates. Does that mean? It means send me the coordinates. Mrs. Reyes, and meet me at the airfield on Friday morning. Early. We'll search your islands. All 3 of them. Anna felt something she hadn't felt in weeks. Hope. Meanwhile, on an island called Cayo Perdido, David was trying to keep 63 people alive. The days had blurred together. They'd built shelters from plane wreckage and palm leaves. They'd figured out how to collect rainwater. They'd learned which fish were safe to eat, but supplies were running low. People were getting sick, and rescue still hadn't come. Every morning, David climbed to the highest point on the island and scanned the horizon. Every evening, he gathered everyone together and kept their spirits up with stories and plans for when they got home. He told them about Anna, about her stubbornness, her intelligence, her fierce determination. He told them about Isabella and her obsession with airplane juice. He made them laugh when all they wanted to do was cry. At night, lying on the beach under the stars, David wondered if Anna thought he was dead. He wondered if she was safe. He wondered if he'd ever see her again. But he didn't give up. And somehow, even though they were hundreds of miles apart, both trapped in their own kind of survival, neither did Anna. Friday morning came cold and gray. Anna arrived at the small airfield before sunrise, carrying a backpack with water, binoculars, and every last dollar she and David had saved. Her hands were shaking as she walked toward the hangar. Captain Rodriguez was already there doing his pre-flight checks on a small twin-engine plane. He was older than Anna had expected, maybe 60, with silver hair and deep lines around his eyes. He looked up when she approached. Mrs. Reyes? Call me Anna. She held out the envelope with the money. It's all there. $12,000. He took it but didn't open it. I'm going to be honest with you. The chances of finding anyone alive after 6 weeks are almost 0. You understand that, right? I understand that everyone keeps telling me that, Anna said. But I also understand math and science and weather patterns, and I understand that my husband wouldn't give up on me, so I'm not giving up on him. Captain Rodriguez studied her face for a long moment, then nodded. Okay then, let's go find your husband. The plane was small and old, but Captain Rodriguez flew it like it was part of him. They took off just as the sun was rising, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Anna pressed her face against the window, watching the ground fall away below them. First Island is about 90 minutes from here, the captain said through the headset. Tell me again why you think they'd be there and not where the search teams looked. Anna pulled out her map, covered in notes and calculations. The plane's last known position was here, but that was before the hurricane hit full force. The winds were moving at over 150 miles per hour. If the plane was still in the air when the storm hit hardest, it would have been pushed way off course. And you calculated where it would have gone? I calculated where it could have gone. These 3 islands are in the probable drift zone. They're also the only islands in that area with beaches long enough for an emergency landing. You're either crazy or brilliant, Captain Rodriguez said. Maybe both. They flew in silence for a while. Anna kept her eyes on the ocean below, watching the water change from deep blue to turquoise as they got closer to the islands. The first island appeared on the horizon, like a green dot in endless blue. As they got closer, Anna could see it was small, covered in dense jungle, with a thin strip of beach around the edges. Captain Rodriguez circled low, and they both searched the ground below. Nothing. No plane wreckage, no signs of people. Nothing but trees and sand and birds. On to the next one, the captain said. Anna tried not to feel discouraged. She'd known it was a long shot. But each empty island made the doubt a little louder in her mind. The second island was bigger, with rocky cliffs on one side and a longer beach on the other. They circled it twice, flying low enough that Anna could see crabs scuttling across the sand. Still nothing. "We're burning fuel," Captain Rodriguez said. "We've got enough for one more island and then we need to head back." Anna's heart was pounding. One more chance. Just one more. The third island was the furthest away, another 40 minutes of flying over empty ocean. Anna stared out the window the entire time, silently begging the universe for a miracle. When the island finally came into view, it looked different from the others. Bigger, with more beach area and what looked like a small lagoon on the inland side. "This is it," Anna whispered. "This has to be it." Captain Rodriguez brought the plane down lower, approaching from the north side of the island. Anna grabbed her binoculars and scanned the beach below. At first, she saw nothing. Just sand and trees and broken coral. Her hope started to crumble. Then something caught her eye. A flash of light, too bright and too regular to be natural. "Like sun reflecting off metal, there," she shouted, pointing. "Did you see that?" Captain Rodriguez banked the plane hard to the right, circling back around. "Where?" "On the beach, near those trees. Something's reflecting light." He brought the plane even lower, and then they both saw it at the same time. Letters. Huge letters spelled out on the beach using pieces of metal. SOS. And next to it, people. Dozens of people running out from under the trees, waving their arms, jumping up and down. Anna's hands flew to her mouth. She was crying and laughing at the same time. "That's them. Oh my God, that's them." Captain Rodriguez was already on the radio. "This is Charter Flight November 72 Papa. We've located survivors from the missing commercial flight at coordinates." He rattled off numbers while Anna kept her binoculars pressed to her eyes, scanning the faces of the people below. And then she saw him. Even from up here, even after 6 weeks, she knew it was David. He was thinner, his shirt was torn, his skin was dark from the sun. But it was him. He was jumping and waving just like the others, and she could see his face, his beautiful face. "That's my husband," she said, her voice breaking. "The tall one near the front." "That's David." Captain Rodriguez nodded, still talking on the radio. "Coast Guard is en route. They'll be here in about 4 hours. There's a small airstrip on an island about 20 miles from here. We'll land there and wait for them." But Anna didn't want to wait. She wanted to jump out of the plane right now, to run to David, to hold him and never let go. She watched through her binoculars as David watched their plane circle overhead. Did he know she was up here? Could he possibly know that she'd found him? On the beach below, David was crying. He couldn't help it. After 6 weeks of scanning the sky every single day, a plane had finally come. They were saved. They were actually saved. The other survivors were hugging each other, crying, laughing, shouting. Patricia, the flight attendant, was on her knees in the sand. The teenage boy who'd been calling for his mother that first day was spinning in circles with his arms spread wide. "They saw us," someone shouted. "They're radiating for help." David watched the plane circle one more time before heading off toward the horizon. He felt like his heart might explode. He was going home. He was going to see Anna and Isabella again. He thought about all the nights he'd lain awake wondering if Anna thought he was dead. He thought about how scared Isabella must have been. He thought about everything they'd lost and everything they'd get back. "Hey, David," Patricia said, walking over to him. "You okay?" "I'm going home," he said, and started laughing. "I'm actually going home." 4 hours felt like 4 years. Captain Rodriguez had landed on the nearby island, and Anna paced back and forth on the small runway until she saw the Coast Guard helicopters appear on the horizon. There were 3 of them. Big military helicopters that headed straight for Cayo Perdido. Anna and Captain Rodriguez watched from the ground as they disappeared over the trees. Then came the longest wait of all. 45 minutes until the first helicopter returned and landed on the runway. The side door slid open and paramedics started helping people out. They were thin and sunburned and exhausted, but they were alive. Anna stood frozen, searching every face. Where was he? Where was David? Then the second helicopter landed. More survivors. Still no David. Her heart started to race. What if she'd been wrong? What if David hadn't been one of the people on the beach? What if... The third helicopter touched down. The door opened, and David stepped out. For a second, they just stared at each other. David looked like he couldn't believe what he was seeing. Anna couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't do anything but stare at the man she'd thought she'd lost for Eve. Then they were running. Both of them running across the runway toward each other. When they collided, David lifted her off the ground and held her so tight she couldn't breathe, and she didn't care. She never wanted him to let go. "You found me," David said into her hair. "How did you find me?" "Math," Anna said, laughing and crying at the same time. "And stubbornness. And Captain Rodriguez. And I don't know, magic maybe." "I knew you wouldn't give up," David whispered. "I told everyone on the island. I said my wife is the smartest, most stubborn person alive, and if anyone could find us, it would be her." They stood there holding each other while helicopters landed and survivors reunited with paramedics, and Captain Rodriguez quietly wiped his eyes and pretended he wasn't crying. Anna pulled back just enough to look at David's face. He had a scar on his forehead she'd never seen before. His eyes looked older somehow. But he was here. He was real. He was alive. "Isabella's with my mom," she said. "We need to call her. She thinks you're dead." "Everyone thinks you're dead." David laughed, a sound full of joy and relief and disbelief. "Then let's go tell them they're wrong." The news spread fast. Within hours, every major network was covering the story. Miracle in the Caribbean. 63 survivors found after 6 weeks. The reporters called Anna a hero. They called David a survivor. They called the whole thing impossible. But sitting in the hospital that first night with David in the bed next to her getting checked by doctors, Anna didn't feel like a hero. She just felt tired and grateful and overwhelmed by everything that had happened. Isabella arrived just before midnight. Anna's mother had driven through the night to bring her. The little girl ran down the hospital corridor so fast that a nurse tried to stop her, but nothing could have stopped Isabella from reaching her father. David was sitting up in bed when she burst through the door. For a moment, Isabella just stood there frozen, like she couldn't believe what she was seeing. Then she whispered, "Daddy?" "Hey, sweet girl," David said, his voice cracking. Isabella launched herself at him, and David caught her, holding her close while she sobbed into his shoulder. Anna sat on the other side of the bed, her hand on David's arm, and they stayed like that for a long time. A family together again. But the fairy tale reunion was just the beginning. The hard part came after. David had nightmares every night. He'd wake up screaming, thinking he was back on the island or back in the falling plane. The doctors said it was post-traumatic stress, that it was normal after what he'd been through. They gave him medication and recommended therapy. Anna had her own struggles. She couldn't handle storms anymore. Even regular rain made her anxious. Thunder sent her into a panic attack. She'd survived the hurricane, but part of her was still trapped in that lighthouse, waiting for the wind to tear her away. And Isabella, poor Isabella, became terrified of being separated from her parents. She had panic attacks when they tried to drop her off at school. She couldn't sleep in her own room anymore. She needed to see both of them, to know they were real and alive and not going anywhere. The media attention made everything worse. Reporters camped outside their temporary apartment. Strangers recognized them in grocery stores. Everyone wanted to hear the story, to know how it felt, to get a piece of their miracle. 3 months after the rescue, David tried to go back to work. He showed up at the airline training center, put on his uniform, and walked out to the simulator. He'd flown thousands of hours. He could do this. But when he sat in the pilot's seat and they started the simulation, his hands started shaking. His chest got tight. He couldn't breathe. The walls felt like they were closing in. He had to leave before he completely broke down. That night, he told Anna he couldn't do it. "He couldn't fly anymore, I know," she said quietly. They were sitting on their small balcony, watching the sunset. "I can't go near the ocean either. I tried last week just to walk on the beach. I made it about 10 steps before I had to turn around." David took her hand. "What are we going to do?" "I'm a pilot who can't fly." "You're a marine biologist who's afraid of the ocean." "We're a mess. We're alive," Anna corrected. "We're together. We'll figure out the rest." And slowly they did. David found work as a flight instructor, teaching on the ground instead of in the air. It wasn't the same as flying, but he discovered he loved teaching. He was patient with nervous students because he understood fear now. He knew what it meant to be terrified of something you used to love. Anna took a job at the university inland, far from the coast. She taught marine biology to students who had never experienced what she'd been through. Sometimes, in the middle of a lecture about coral reefs, she'd think about her destroyed research and feel a wave of sadness. But then she'd look at the eager faces in front of her. and remember that knowledge wasn't just about collecting data. It was about passing it on. Isabella started therapy with a kind woman named Dr. Chen who specialized in childhood trauma. It took months, but gradually Isabella started to heal. She learned techniques for managing her anxiety. She made friends at her new school. She started sleeping in her own room again, though she still needed the door open and a nightlight on. The survivors from the island stayed in touch. They'd all been through something that no one else could understand, and that created a bond that couldn't be broken. They started having reunions every year on the anniversary of the rescue. They called themselves the Cayo Perdido family. At the first reunion, held in a hotel conference room in Miami, 63 people and their families gathered together. There were tears and laughter and so many hugs. Patricia, the flight attendant, brought her new baby. The teenage boy, now in college, brought his mother, who had been waiting on the mainland. Everyone brought photos and stories. David stood up to speak, and the room went quiet. A year ago, we were all just strangers on a plane. Now we're family. We survived something that should have killed us. And we survived because we took care of each other. I want you all to know that I think about you every day. You're all heroes to me. Then he turned to Anna, who was standing in the back of the room with Isabella. But the real hero is my wife. She's the one who refused to give up. She's the one who did the impossible math and found us when everyone else had stopped looking. I'm only here because she's the most stubborn, brilliant person I've ever met. Everyone turned to look at Anna. She felt her face get hot. She'd never been comfortable with attention. But then everyone started clapping and some people were crying, and she realized that this wasn't about being a hero. It was about family, about love, about never giving up on the people who matter. 3 years after the storm, on Isabella's 10th birthday, they decided to go back to Marisol. It was the first time any of them had returned since the hurricane. The village had been rebuilt, though it looked different now. The houses were newer, painted in bright colors. The harbor had been completely reconstructed. There were new boats, new shops, new faces, but the lighthouse was still there. It had been restored and turned into a memorial for the people who'd died in the storm. Anna, David, and Isabella walked up the spiral staircase together, holding hands. At the top, they found a wall covered in photographs. Pictures of the village before the storm, pictures of the people who hadn't made it, and in the center a plaque that read, "In memory of those lost, in celebration of those who survived. May we always remember that storms pass, but hope remains." Anna stood at the window where she'd once waved at the rescue helicopter, where she'd seen her entire world destroyed. David stood behind her, his arms around her waist. Isabella leaned against both of them. "Are you okay, Mom?" Isabella asked. Anna thought about the question. Was she okay? She still had nightmares sometimes. She still couldn't watch weather reports without feeling anxious. She'd lost her research, her home, everything she'd worked for. But she had David. She had Isabella. She had a new life that wasn't perfect, but was theirs. "Yeah," she said, and meant it. "I'm okay." That evening, they attended the dedication of the lighthouse's new beacon. The whole village gathered as the mayor gave a speech about resilience and hope. Then, as the sun set, the new light was turned on for the first time. It was stronger than the old one, bright enough to be seen from miles away. Bright enough to guide ships safely home. Bright enough to cut through any storm. Anna had donated money to make that light possible. She'd wanted it to be powerful enough that no one would ever get lost in the dark again. Strong enough that pilots flying overhead would see it and know where they were. As the beam swept across the sky, David pulled both Anna and Isabella close. "That light reminds me of you," he told Anna. "You were my beacon. You guided me home when I was lost." Isabella looked up at her parents. "Does this mean we're not sad anymore?" Anna and David looked at each other. They'd been through something terrible. They'd been broken and had to rebuild themselves piece by piece. They'd never be the same people they were before the storm, but maybe that was okay. Maybe being broken and healing was part of what made them strong. "We're not sad right now," Anna said, kissing the top of Isabella's head. "And right now is all that matters." As they stood there together watching the lighthouse beam sweep across the darkening sky, Anna thought about everything the storm had taken. Her home, her research, months of fear and pain. But she also thought about what